It's Tuesday, I'm Guy, and you're watching Off My Bridge. Now, this week we do the review of The Next Generation, that wonderful series that came out in the 80s and 90s, and that relaunched Star Trek onto our screens. Luckily, it survived the first season, because the first season of The Next Generation is possibly one of the second worst seasons of all time. It made it really tough to do this review. So, as usual, we will be doing the format of looking at the first two official episodes of the series, not at the two-part pilot. And that's set a very low bar, I'm afraid. And why is that? Well, the first two episodes are The Naked Now and Code of Honor. And both episodes are, well, they're not great. As a matter of fact, Code of Honor is very disturbing to watch by modern sensibilities, at least from my perspective anyway. I found it to be a little bit too on the nose and not subtle at all in terms of the messaging that was contained within. And the very first aspect that we'll be looking at is the setting Star Trek? There is no doubt that The Next Generation is definitely Star Trek. The setting for The Naked Now and for Code of Honor, they are both very Star Trekian in their approach. One is a ship contagion, and the other is a new and exotic culture that has been encountered. And if that isn't Star Trek, I don't know what is. Now, the Enterprise has been built to modern sensibilities in the 80s and 90s anyway. The sets are robust. There is a lot of attention to detail in the background, and the starship and the graphics that are involved are super high-tech. It definitely feels, especially if you were watching in the early 90s, that this is Star Trek, this is the future, and that everything is very, very real. Quite the contrast to the original series, which had bright colors and quite obviously very cheap sets. This is the exact opposite. Everything has this look of being modern, polished, and finished. And I think that that's a great start for the series. As a result, in terms of setting, is it Star Trek? Absolutely. It scores a 4 out of 5. Why did it drop a point? Well, there are some aliens present, but unfortunately in both episodes, the aliens that are seen are not new aliens. They don't introduce us to anything Star Trekian in terms of strange new worlds and cultures. It feels very much like we are just dealing with humans. And I know Worf is on the bridge, but he also has a very small role to play in both episodes. Surprising, considering that one is called Code of Honor. What are the stories that are hinted at? Is there a prospect of future discoveries, of future stories? Well, it feels very episodic. The Naked Now and Code of Honor have nothing to do with each other. There doesn't seem to be a longer arc or story brewing. There is something interesting going on between the Doctor and the Captain and Wesley Crusher. The crew themselves are still exploring. Data is the only one who really provides us with anything very interesting to look at. He is a fully functional android, after all. Again, not great episodes to launch the series with, but I think there is enough here that we kind of say, well, all right, it's episodic, but we've got an interesting crew, especially considering that the captain is the exact opposite of Kirk, where Kirk would have charged in guns blazing with Spock trying to rein him back. Picard is the one who's reining back his crew, much to the chagrin of his first officer. So, whereas Spock was providing quotations and legal restrictions to Kirk, Riker is pushing for more emotions, a more humanistic approach than Picard is willing to let on. So it does create some interesting kind of tensions. So there is some hints of things to happen in the future, but not a huge amount. As a result, I'm giving it a score of 3. Okay, so let's look at the actual characters themselves, their competence, their likability, and their proactivity. Well, it's complicated, especially because The Next Generation hadn't yet settled on their final cast. They were still playing around with who was going to be Chief of Engineering, and there are various options given to us in Naked Now and Code of Honor. None of them really fit, and Geordi's kind of a loose cannon. We still don't really know what Worf is doing as opposed to Tasha Yar. Having said that, though, the characters certainly have come to life very, very quickly. This is not the original series where we didn't even have Sulu and Chekhov until a different season. So the characters are definitely interesting, and we are learning about them at a rapid pace, which is something that I think is really strong. We don't really get that kind of character growth in the original series or in other series later on. So I think that they're going to score a very respectable 4. Execution, visual style, special effects, well, the Next Generation has blown it out of the proverbial box. In comparison to the original series, Next Gen has pushed all of the technology, pushed all of the filmmaking tips and tricks that have been generated since the original series, which admittedly was 20 years beforehand, and really put them to good use. No expense has been spared in terms of the ship model that was built, the actual sets themselves, the projections, the effects. The Naked Now features a frozen starship, and at no point do you think that these poor people were not frozen to death. The effects team really went to town on making sure that it looked good. The environments that our heroes beam down into in Code of Honor, although is still relatively simplistic, was a whole new world, something that we hadn't seen before. We kind of moved away from the flat backgrounds that original series had, although not too far. There were still limits to what they could do in those days, but it's definitely an improvement. The diagrams, the quality of the props that they had, everything was just taken up a notch. And so I'm going to give it a solid 5. Must-watch factor. Is this the series that you must watch? To be perfectly honest with you, I cannot answer this accurately. Not with the first 2 episodes. Unfortunately, the first 2 episodes of Next Generation do not present a more interesting universe. They present the same universe that we had in the original series, which, although was interesting, was very human-centric. Humanoid-centric, let's put it that way. The Naked Now and Code of Honor, both of them, it's humans all the way. So is this essential viewing? Looking at it, it's something that we're going to continue exploring. It's going to expand on the original series, we hope. And so I would say that it gets a 4. It's not pushing boundaries. If, of course, they had started with a different set of episodes from Season 1, then these scores would have been much, much higher. There's 2 episodes in particular that come to mind. Episode 8, The Battle, featuring the Ferengi, and Episode 24, Conspiracy, introducing the Romulans. Now, if those 2 episodes had been our next 2 episodes, the scores would have been almost perfect 5s. They introduce aliens, they introduce weird and wonderful concepts, they expand the galaxy tremendously in terms of our understanding of the dynamics and the diplomatic situations that our new world is in. Anyway, even with the Naked Now and Code of Honor being not as strong as they could have been, Star Trek The Next Generation scores a very respectable 19. That is the highest natural score that we've received so far for the series, but it is, I think, a very good indicator that Next Generation was a solid entry. And I think that most of you will agree with me, Next Generation only got better and better and better and better. It certainly had one of the greatest Star Trek series endings of all time. I think you'll all agree on that one. And so there we are. That's Next Generation for you. I think, in my opinion, if someone were to say, I want to watch Star Trek and get a feel for Star Trek, but I want to get a feel for the older Star Trek, Next Generation has got to be one of the strong contenders for giving the viewer the experience of what Star Trek is all about. Anyway, until next week, when we're looking at some new ways of coming up with adventures, I wish you and yours long life and happy gaming.